Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers. And you are in season 4 of Wrestling at Random, where, as we've said ad nauseum, the randomizer in this season is packed full. It is filled to the brim. It is running. It is smoking. Steam is coming out of its proverbial ears. And with that, we've had several, whether it be pay-per-view events or TV shows that we've never covered before on the podcast. And this is, I believe, one of them. While we have had episodes of NWA, WCW TV, whether that be Saturday Night, World Championship Wrestling, Power Hour, Worldwide, Nitro.
Yeah, we've almost hit them all.
We've almost hit them all until this week, where maybe we put the final this final check mark on the board, as it is an episode of the Sunday evening NWA/WCW show from this era here. February 11th, 1990, NWA Main Event Wrestling.
I'm looking forward to recapping this episode of a show we have not done yet, NWA Main Event. But before we do, you mentioned the randomizer up top. For those of you who are just joining us for the first time, we see a lot of the new listeners flooding in here on the metrics. So I want to welcome you and explain how this works. So we take all of the internet's wrestling content. There's a ton of it, and we dump it into the randomizer. It's busting at the seams. We're talking all eras, all territories, anywhere where there's wrestling available on all corners of the internet. We have put it into the randomizer. We fire it up, and it will choose a show for us to watch. We review that show for you right here for free every single week. And boy, season 4, it is all over the place. The good news is all those different types of TV shows that Adam mentioned at the top, those are all available right now for free in the back catalog of this podcast. So this is evergreen standalone content. It's like it just came out yesterday, except we're better podcasters every day. So go.
That is true.
You can always go back into our archives and listen to. You can listen to the whole season. You can start with season 3. You can start with season 2. You can pick and choose certain shows you want. I highly recommend you going back and listen to every single episode here in season 4. Very proud of the work we're doing in season 4. Season 3, a ton of fun as well. And we make reference to a lot of stuff that you'll have to go back to season 1 and season 2 for as well. And it's so easy to do. They're all available to you right there. That is how the show works. So we will review these shows and try to parachute in and see. Okay, I'm a viewer in 1990, and I'm watching this show. How good of a job are you doing catching me up on what's going on? And what am I watching? What is this show that you're putting on television? Is this something that I would like as a fan, which is really interesting when we get into a lot of the territories that we've never explored before here on the podcast.
Yeah, would this show have hooked me into becoming a wrestling fan? And like you said, sometimes, you go back to like Championship Wrestling from Florida, where neither of us had ever seen a full episode of TV before. That was a fascinating show to do, and I think podcast to listen to, because we came into it with open eyes while knowing who the wrestlers were. We had never watched an episode of that territory. Whereas something like this week, I think will be interesting that, while, as you said, we always both try to watch it through new eyes, this is one where, were you watching NWA, WCW regularly during this time period?
100%. I remember every single thing about this. We will talk about the Clash of the Champions 10.
It was a few years later then where you dropped off, because then there's an era of early 90s WCW where, like, I was hardcore during this period. I was still hardcore during that period, and you had kind of dropped off for a little bit. But this
yes, I left in March of 92. In March of 92, I left professional wrestling, did not watch, and did not come back until March of 1996.
A 4-year hiatus, a presidential term length hiatus from the pro wrestling.
From watching any sort of pro wrestling. That is my dark period. I did not see any pro wrestling there. So anything that shows up from the randomizer within that time period is all new to me. But
those are super fun shows to listen to, by the way. If you never have before, those shows from that 92 to 96 period where Jeremy was out and he's aware of obviously he's aware of who the wrestlers are and vaguely generally what was happening, but you're seeing that really kind of strange era of WCW, WWF, and early ECW. It's fun to hear your reactions to those things you never saw before.
Yeah, this, however, you're going to hear my reactions of remembering this as being so cool as a child.
Yes.
Will it hold up as I watch it on a rewatch? Because I did, parachuting in, you tell me it's going to be February 11th, 1990. I don't have my bearings yet. I know we had Starrcade 89, which was Future Shock, the round robin tournament.
Yeah, round robin tournaments, because we had the tag and singles round robin tournaments where I remember being so excited to rent that VHS.
Oh, I watched it on pay-per-view.
I was not allowed to order pay-per-views at that point in my life, but renting on VHS and being so violently angry as a 9-year-old that the Great Muta lost all of his matches on that show, that he didn't beat anybody.
No, he was undefeated going into that.
Yeah,
and then lost all of his matches.
Lost to everyone, and that his booking on that show was a factor in him leaving WCW eventually, and not that long after, actually going back to New Japan.
So I know that we're early into 1990 here, but I don't really have my bearings yet of where we are until they start referencing Clash of the Champions 10, and I am whiplashed right back. I know exactly where this is, and I know exactly what's going to happen. So I was very excited to watch this show play out. So the show opens with Jim Ross and Missy Hyatt welcoming us. She's the new co-host of this show, and Be Still My Heart. 1990, Missy Hyatt was one of my first crushes. Definitely one of my first female posters on the wall, for sure.
The gold standard, I think, for anyone growing up during this time period. He also, so the show opens, Jim Ross welcomes Missy Hyatt back to TBS. So was this after? I know Missy Hyatt had a very brief sojourn to the WWF that I don't know if it ever actually made tape. She had a few talk show segments that didn't work out well and they dropped her. Was this right after that, or is this a different departure?
I'm not sure exactly. When I was looking through some old Observer newsletters around this time period, it was, she was transitioning from being a manager to now broadcaster.
That's what it is. I'm looking at it right now. And yes, her brief run in WWF was in 1987. And this was, she had stopped being a manager and returned to her role as a commentator and host of WCW Main Event in 1990.
Yep. Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker is in the ring. His opponent, Norman the Lunatic.
And we've seen in quite a few different formats here on this show. We've seen him as Makan Singh in Stampede. Mm-hmm. We've seen him as Bastion Booger in the WWF, but here we see him as Norman the Lunatic, which we have seen him a few other times, I believe, on the show. What's most noteworthy to me, though, is we go to the arena. I am delirious with joy as this show is being broadcast from the Cobb County Civic Center.
It is.
You'd always see that on the rundowns of where they were going to next on NWA or WCW shows. You'd always hear about the Cobb County Civic Center. They did TV tapings there, and this was, in fact, taped at the Cobb County Civic Center. It somehow both looks tiny and huge at the same time, which is a strange thing for a building to look, but it's got one balcony, if you can call it that, but then the floor is actually really well lit compared to other small arenas of that time period. And it's packed. And not only is it packed, it is packed with kids in the front row. This is a very, very young crowd. I almost wonder if this was a daytime school field trip type of taping. It just has a really different vibe.
He comes out to his theme song, Make Me Wanna Shout. And
the music on this show is incredible, and it's not edited out because this is a bootleg copy of the actual show as it aired rather than something that is on something like Peacock or the WWE Network.
we're told that Norman will face Cactus Jack at Wrestle War. We're gonna run down a lot of the matches that are going to that are scheduled for Wrestle War, and this card was stacked and sounded awesome, it's one of those shows that what could have been.
Yes, yes, and we will go through, run the gamut of emotions of what could have been and what ended up being as we go through the show in the very end of the show. This is quite the eventful episode of Main Event.
Jim Ross is on commentary with Michael P.S. Hayes. So Missy Hyatt is just like the host with Jim Ross in between matches, but not commentary. That's Michael P.S. Hayes, who we never see.
Yeah, it's definitely a different setup in that, we see Jim Ross and Missy Hyatt. I don't think they're actually there, but we see them green screened in with the arena in the background. But that's a good point. We never actually see Michael Hayes with Jim Ross.
Norman with a clothesline, and then he hits a 1-foot drop kick, which I was not ready for.
No, a drop. My notes are Norman with a drop kick of sorts, and I think of sorts is the best way to describe this. As far as big man drop kicks, this is no Jim the Anvil Neidhart 80s drop kick.
After missing a charge in the corner, we get a couple of Buddy Lee Parker moves, beating on Norman, but he quickly makes a comeback with a backdrop, hits a leg drop, and then a sunset flip attempt, and he gets cut off, and the tape gets cut off.
The tape gets cut off.
The tape gets cut off. I assume he won, but we just go right back to Jim Ross and Missy Hyatt.
Not only do we assume that Norman won, I am livid. I am irate. My eyes are red. They're bulging out of my head because not only is the finish cut off, it is obvious what the finish is going to be. It is going to be Norman the Lunatic countering a sunset flip with a northern exposure, a sit-out ass splash, if you will, and we don't get to see it. A criminal offense by whoever recorded this show.
Yeah, so we're back to Jim Ross and Missy Hyatt. We're mad we were robbed of a northern exposure, but I'm sorry. Missy Hyatt is always an upgrade over anything I'm watching.
And particularly over Norman the Lunatic and Buddy Lee Parker on my screen. I will definitely take that alternative. By the way, I wouldn't say I saw anything in this match from Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker that would tell me this is the guy WCW should entrust some 6 or 7 years later to train their future stars.
To run the power plant and be their head trainer? How? Like, he was always Jobber Plus. And
he was always Jobber Plus.
But he had never stood out as like there was always like hey, Brad Armstrong's a really good wrestler even though he's Jobber Plus a lot of the time. But there was never this clamoring about what a great wrestler Buddy Lee Parker was.
No, there were guys in WCW that you'd watch us in that Jobber Plus role. I think of another guy, Mark Starr, who would then go on to have the kind of the Jobber Plus tag team with Chris Kanyon, Men at Work. Like Mark Starr was a guy who thought, maybe they could do something with that guy. I don't think anyone ever looked at Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker and said, it's a shame that guy never got a run at the TV title, for example. Or it's a shame the State Patrol never got a U.S. Tag title run.
We then get a recap of Clash of Champions 10, where the Horsemen, represented by Ole Anderson, Arn Anderson, Ric Flair, and Sting, they're in the ring to confront Sting,
who is a member of the Horsemen. Just to reiterate, This is during what would otherwise seem, if you're parachuting in and don't know what's going on, a very strange time period with the Horsemen where they are baby faces with Sting as a part of the group, with Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and somehow babyface Ole Anderson in late 1989, early 1990. It seemed destined to explode like a powder keg, and that's exactly what it did.
Yeah, they're baby faces because Sting and Flair had the common enemy of the JTEX Corporation here. Yes. They were feuding with Buzz Sawyer and Great Muta and Terry Funk, and so this was they the common enemies bringing together the Horsemen and Sting becoming a member of the Horsemen and them working together. So here, Sting gets a chance to get a world title match. The world champion is Ric Flair, and Sting's got an opportunity to get a title match. And so obviously the Horsemen are like, well, you're going to have to give up that championship opportunity. And Sting's like, no way, not happening. And Ole sets up this confrontation. And Ole says, you need to give up that chance of the world title. And when he says no, he says, you aren't a Horseman. He goes to walk away. Sting grabs him. And he turns around and Flair sucker punches Sting. He's screaming at him, get out of that contract, get out of this business, get out of our lives. Later in that show, after the Horsemen win their cage match, Flair went charging after Sting as they have a fight and a pull apart in the aisleway.
He goes flying over.
Tremendous.
This is incredible. Like, you think about modern pull aparts, and a lot of times they don't seem wild and unhinged, and you don't really get the sense that the guys hate each other. Oh my God. Flair, like, almost somersaults over Sting's shoulders. He runs so fast and jumps so hard after him. This is great.
Flair was so good in this promo because Flair was convinced that Sting was just going to be like, okay, we're not gonna fight for the title. We're just friends.
He was trying to be in his own Ric Flair way. He thought he was being the good guy here, saying
yes,
he bought Sting more time to make the decision, and he was convinced that Sting would just go along with what he wanted. But it's like the best bad guy in that he's completely convinced that he's pure.
And so he didn't just attack him, right? Like it's one of those, like, Ole is the one who wants nothing to do with Sting. Sting shouldn't be here ever. This is completely ridiculous.
He's been looking for a reason to make this happen.
He's been looking for the reason, and he knew he was never going to convince Rick about it, and then until this whole thing explodes, and then when Rick sees that he's not going to get his way, the Horsemen turn on Sting. I remember this angle so vividly.
Oh my God.
And I'm glad it was even better watching it back here because I could pay attention to the nuances on second, third, probably 10th viewing of how good Rick was here, how good Arn was here, and Ole being Ole was tremendous. This was and Sting being like shocked, like, wait, we're all friends, guys. Why do we have to do this? It'll be just a fun sport. We're just gonna have a match. It's no big deal. Best man wins. Babyface fighting champion type of thing here. It was tremendous. I loved every bit of it.
Well, and it also works so well too because this is the first of what would become the longest running theme and story in Sting's career, which is having terrible judgment in who he should trust. He trusted Ric Flair, who had been his adversary, his opponent, but also helped to make him in that match in the Clash of Champions 1 in 1988. And he thought that for whatever Ric Flair had done in the past and the diabolical characters that Arn and particularly Ole were, he thought he had a genuine bond with Ric Flair that could see through all that, and they could get along, and this could continue. And to your point, he did not have any inkling in his mind that him getting a title shot against Ric Flair could cause these problems. Flair doesn't want to defend the title against Sting, but also, at least in the moment, seems to not want for this to become a thing, something that was going to drive a wedge between them. And so he says, I bought you more time, but do the right thing. Walk away from this title shot. We can all go on and we can keep this going. But then when Sting basically says no, and then Ole grabs him and Flair pops him, then Flair not only is saying, walk away from this title shot, he said, get out of this sport, run away and don't come back, which again, in his own Ric Flair way, in his mind, the character Ric Flair is saving his friend Sting by saying, "Get out! I'm beating you up right now. Never come back." That's obviously not to be, though.
We get a Horseman promo talking about this incident.
Would you get Sting to sign this? I'm going to puke. I've always been myself. I don't want to tell anybody out there that I'm John Wayne and I've got on a big white hat and I'm going to do the right thing. What I'm going to do, like they're going to do, is exactly what we want. Sting, you wanted to be there in the limelight. You wanted to get elevated, but we said, hey, Stinger, let's go to the party. Let's make an appearance like we want to make. Then it was, no, I got to get to bed. I got to get a nap. I got to get up in the morning and train. Well, pal, as you laid there garbling, swallowing your own spit, with all that training and all those stingers help you, not a chance. Tell him, Nate.
Let me ask you something real calm. Why would a man pay $2,000 for a custom-made suit if he couldn't tell a punk like you and the whole world that he had it on? I've had it up to here. I think kids are great. Everybody ought to have 5 or 6. But they got nothing to do with this sport. This is professional wrestling. And Sting, you, my friend, and Ric Flair have got a difference of opinion a mile long. Greensboro, North Carolina. You don't like what happened to you? You don't like paying the price? Then walk that aisle, punk. I'll paint it up and shut this mouth. We're talking the World Championship. It's owned, operated, motivated, and designed by me. Ask around.
After all of that greatness, we go to the ring and we see the Mod Squad, who are still around. I believe that they've been on shows we reviewed from like 1987 World Championship Wrestling. They're still around here in 1990, and they are a jobber tag team. And
I'm not prepared to have to watch the Mod Squad after that Horseman promo, which, by the way, it cut off at the end of the promo on our tape, which enraged me to no end. But after seeing the greatness that was this Horseman promo, particularly Ric Flair saying, "I think kids are great. Everyone should have 5 or 6." But they have no place in professional wrestling when talking about the little stingers. I lost it. Ric Flair, a god among men here. Arn Anderson in the background talking about, as you heard, like, if I have to have one more kid ask for my autograph, I'm going to puke. I don't want to be a good guy. Good Lord, the Horsemen were incredible here. And we go from that highest of highs to the Mod Squad, who I don't know if there's ever been a team that I've seen that belonged more in like 1989 Continental or late 87, early 88 AWA than what we get from the Mod Squad here in 1990 somehow in WCW. It's Spike and Basher, and they're taking on, returning to the NWA, the Rock and Roll Express.
Thank God. I was like, oh, what are we going to have to sit through? Thank God it's the Rock and Roll Express. They come out and they are as popular as ever.
Yes.
This place is losing their minds for the Rock and Rolls. And again, we're told it's going to be the Rock and Roll Express taking on the Midnight Express at Wrestle War. I'm 2 matches in. This show sounds amazing. I want to watch this show.
Yes, the Wrestle War 1990 pay-per-view sounds incredible from so far what we've heard on here. Also, have we not yet had a Rock and Roll Express versus Midnight Express match on this podcast through 4 seasons in the bonus feed? I don't think we've gotten a proper Midnight Express Rock and Roll Express match yet. That is shocking, if so, and dare I say, appalling.
I thought we got one from a Clash, like a U.S. tag title match from a Clash.
I thought that was Midnight's and the Southern Boys.
That might be it. That might be what I'm thinking.
Awesome Midnight Southern Boys match.
That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah. So no, I guess we have not.
Even if we've had one, we need a lot more of Rock and Roll.
No, because what we got,
Express.
We did 1986 Starrcade, so we did get the Skywalker match with them. So it doesn't count. Doesn't count.
Let's take all the great qualities of the 2 best tag teams of the era and put them in a match where none of those matter and none of those can be on display. That's why I don't remember that, because it was not a true Rock and Roll's Midnights match.
No. After a big tackle by Basher of the Mod Squad.
Spike and Basher. One of them is worse. I apologize. I can't remember which, but like one of them is competent. The other is like barely trained yet somehow in his 4th year in the National Wrestling Alliance.
So after this tackle, Ricky Morton's first move is going to the top rope and hitting a crossbody for 2.
Yes, very early on. I thought that might actually be the finish. I also love how Michael Hayes calls the Rock and Roll Express counterfeit Freebirds.
So the Mod Squads continue to be boring in this match. Basher misses a splash, but holds the leg to continue to get the heat on Morton.
Oh my God. They get the heat on Ricky Morton for what felt like an hour and a half in this 1 hour TV show. They cut him off and cut him off and cut him off. And it is not entertaining. Basher is short and doughy. Spike is bigger and a bit more solid. I think he's the better of the two, but man, like my only take on this match as we're going through it is why are the Rock and Roll Express selling so much for the Mod Squad? I know that's what the Rock and Roll Express do. They sell, but come on. We saw that match with, was it for the Boogie Jam show? Rock and Roll Express against Ole and Arn, where whatever show that was, where like, they're the baby faces. Ole and Arn are the heels. And the Rock and Rolls are on offense for like the first 20 minutes of that match, it felt like. But here they're selling from go.
Yeah, that was a Starrcade tag match, right? That was a Starrcade tag title match.
Which was awesome, but weird.
Yeah, here, way too much selling, way too boring. Gibson finally makes a hot tag, and he runs wild on the Mod Squad. Morton blind tags back in as Mod Squad Spike backdrops Gibson. Morton rolls up Spike and gets the pin. So the Mod Squad had a ton of offense and got a ton of heat on Ricky Morton. They did not win with their double dropkick finisher. They won with a roll-up, escaping from here. And now I'm concerned that their match with the Midnight Express, they might not be at that level.
Yeah. My take from this match on a kayfabe level is Rock and Roll Express are going to have a hard time defeating the Midnight Express. What happened in their time away from the NWA that it took them this long, and it was that much of a fluke win to defeat the Mod Squad? I think we may have finally found a match to rival that AWA 1987 tag team match where Marty Jannetty of the Midnight Rockers was selling and selling and
he's still selling.
He still is selling, and he will be selling after you're done with this show. This is probably the closest that we've gotten to that. It may not have gotten all the way there, but there had to have been 6 or 7 times where Ricky Morton was getting beat down, is about to make the hot tag to Robert Gibson, and then Spike or Basher cut him off like in the exact same way every time. I salute the men, women, and particularly children of Cobb County and their civic center for staying with us. They were red hot chanting rock and roll during all these heat segments. So I guess who am I to complain? But man, not the most watchable Rock and Roll Express match I've ever seen, and it's not their fault.
Gordon Soley talks to Sting. And Gordon says, not since Pearl Harbor has there been a double cross like this.
It's even better. The direct quote, because I wrote it down. I rewound it to make sure I had it correct. And we love Gordon Soley. We are a Gordon Soley Appreciation Society for the most part in this podcast. But he starts this interview by saying, direct quote, not since Pearl Harbor has a nation or individual been double crossed like this. I lost it. I love you, Gordon Soley. This was amazing.
So Sting beat Ric Flair at Starrcade in that round robin tournament. And that was where the seed of doubt was planted in the back of Flair's mind that if they did have a match, he couldn't beat him.
Perfectly logical. I loved Sting adding this in this interview.
It was tremendous. He says he's going to win the world title. We get a Ruse commercial. These are
amazing.
Shoes for your feet. pockets for your stuff. For those who don't remember what roos were, like kangaroos, because they have a pouch. Roos, the shoes, have like little zipper pocket on the shoes.
What I always think is that I like my marketing when it needs an explanation. that's what roos are. It needed that explanation. It's one of those that if you did not grow up in the 80s, this will not make any sense to you. But if you were a kid, you desperately wanted roos. Roos were a big sponsor of WCW for a brief period of time. And so we get this wacky Sting commercial for roos. We get the Road Warriors commercial for roos. We have around this time on pay-per-views, we will have roos corner
padding around the ring post.
Covers. They were everywhere, including on WCW programming. These commercials were ridiculous. They were great. I'm so glad that these were kept in on this video file.
I wanted a pair of roos so bad. And the way that shoes worked at my house was are they covering your feet? Are your feet exposed? And the exposure of your foot has to be more than 30%, because just a hole or two in the shoes not good enough to warrant a new pair of shoes.
Same here.
Your foot had to be hanging out of the shoe for us to have to go get you a new pair of shoes. So me running to my parents and saying, "Gotta get a pair of roos," was met with, "Those shoes look fine." Yeah. So never got a pair of roos.
Is there a legitimate safety reason why you need new shoes? Could a now puncture your foot? If not, you're wearing those shoes. No roos for you.
Yeah. So, roos. I've never met. I know a lot of friends who remember this time period of roos, but I don't know anyone who actually owned a pair.
That's a very good point. I remember wanting one, but also, curiously enough, never seeing anyone in class wearing it. It wasn't like that. Do you remember British Knights? BKs were like that?
Of course. Yeah, BKs were everywhere.
What were the ones where you could pump them up and that was supposed to do something and had the pump like...
Yeah, those were Nikes. Yeah.
Okay, but I feel like it was something. I feel like British Knights had those as well. Whichever one it was, I remember like never being able to get those and being so like I remember thinking I could just be a good basketball player if I could have the shoes that pump. Because the ones that I remember wanting like had a little basketball logo.
Reebok had, like everyone had. Once Nike put it out, then like Reebok had the ones where you could pump up the little basketball and stuff.
That was the one I wanted. Was the Reebok ones where you could pump up the little basketball. I remember going to the shoe store and trying them on and doing it and just thinking like I could be cool if it was
I can feel the difference. I can feel the difference. The air in the shoe. How I've been living without air in my shoe.
Exactly. It's what a scam, but man, I wanted it.
If you are a listener to this podcast and if you had a pair of roos, we want to hear about it.
Yes.
Make sure you're interacting with the show via Twitter @WrestleAtRandom, also Instagram @WrestleAtRandom as well. Please send us a message. Tell us if you owned a pair of roos, because we loved them, but never knew anyone that had one. So definitely want to hear from you.
If you're watching this show on YouTube, as many people do, leave a comment. As we always say, interact with the show on YouTube, as we've said from the beginning.
That's right. Please do that as well. If you prefer, even if you are an audio consumer of this podcast, throwing us a subscribe over at the YouTube channel helps us a ton. So please do that as well. We go back to this show after the commercial. We're told about the Skyscrapers Chicago street fight against the Road Warriors at Wrestle War. It's going to be Dangerous Danny Spivey and Mean Mark Callis, the future Undertaker. An awesome incarnation of the Skyscrapers.
Yes, one that's largely forgotten because I think everyone thinks of Danny Spivey and Sid Vicious as the Skyscrapers, but here it's Danny Spivey, Mean Mark Callis, who we did see once as Mean Mark Callis on this podcast. It might have been earlier this season or in season 3, and they are managed by Teddy Long.
Yes, so this sounds awesome. A street fight with those guys and the Road Warriors at Wrestle War. This card is I am so close to watching Wrestle War on my own here,
Yes.
without without the randomizer picking it, because this card is sounding so stacked. We'll
it's
get
got
to it later.
Some serious hook it directly into my veins qualities. This is a mean guys tag match, big tough burly guys, and we get a promo from Dangerous Danny Spivey, Mean Mark Callis, and Teddy Long. Danny Spivey, not a great promo here, but oh my God, Teddy Long bopping around during this
Tremendous.
is a treasure.
We then get the Road Warriors with Paul Ellering, who, am I alone in thinking Paul Ellering's not a good promo?
He's not, and it's very strange because every single promo he's ever done, it gets about 80% of the way to being really good.
Yes.
And then at some point, he loses his place or he says something weird like here. The babyface manager of the Road Warriors decides to draw inspiration from and directly quote Arn Anderson by name.
You said it so eloquently. He gets 80% of the way there, and then he always I feel like he fumbles on the goal line,
Yes.
and then we never, you don't remember it being a good promo because he just doesn't get there.
It's also unnecessary because Animal wasn't a great promo, but Hawk was an awesome, weird, loud, snarling, strange promo that did not need a manager talking for him.
No, the Road Warriors were perfect Road Warriors promo guys.
Yes.
Like they did exactly, and they said in this promo that it's gut check time. We go back to Missy Hyatt, who tells us the Road Warriors have never lost a Chicago street fight.
She
I
did
believe it.
research, she said, and
Yes.
she was very proud of herself, and I am proud of Missy as well.
Yes, Missy is me when I do research for this podcast, and I'm
There
proud
you
of it.
go. There you go.
We then hear the theme song from the movie Halloween, and we know what's coming. It's the SST, the Wild Samoans, teaming with the Samoan Savage, managed by your favorite, the Hump, Sir Oliver Humperdinck.
Yes, I had forgotten. This is maybe the only acceptable Sir Oliver Humperdinck managing run. I actually did not mind him with the Samoan SWAT team, and you said it with the entrance music. One of the best, scariest entrances.
Tremendous.
I remember as a kid being like 9 years old, 9 years old, watching the SST with this music and being legit scared of them. You will see in the GIF for this week's show, if you haven't already, it is the SST coming down to the ring, being scary. And man, this is just, it's right up there with, I would say the only entrance music that to me was more ominous than this, an entrance overall, would have been in the Thunderdome cage match when Great Muta and Terry Funk came out. Terry Funk first had that great Western theme, kind of ominous music, and then the music that Muta had in WCW. This was close to that.
Yeah, I put that Muta music on my Mount Rushmore. I think it's
I'm with you.
It's right up there.
It's like
so
the lightning,
good.
like the thunder sounds, and just just that feeling of unease as Muta comes out with Gary Hart. Just a perfect act all around.
Their opponents, Dr. Death Steve Williams and the Road Warriors. Here comes an ominous theme song. I love hearing Iron Man from Black Sabbath as the Road Warriors come out. But no, instead they come out to Dr. Death's song, Bad to the Bone, not Iron Man. Boo, bad choice.
Otherwise, yeah, it would be okay. But when you have the Road Warriors and you know what their theme song is at this point in the NWA, not the right choice. But man, I'm happy with the randomizer here because we talked about it with the potential of the Road Warriors and the Skyscrapers. It's the same thing here with Dr. Death, the Road Warriors against the Samoan SWAT team and the Samoan Savage. This is a mean guys match. They're going to throw each other around. No quarter will be given or taken. I am hyped for this main event of the main event.
Me too. We get Dr. Death and the Samoan Savage starting out. Dr. Death press slams him over his head. This is a big dude, and he immediately starts by press slamming him over his head twice. The first two moves of the match.
The first two moves of the match. Also, we should point out Jim Ross was incredible throughout this entire show. This is peak Jim Ross, like Mid-South Jim Ross through, like, to me, 92, 93. If you've only ever heard him in the WWF, WWE, yes, he was great in his own way there, but you missed out if you did not see and hear this era of Jim Ross. He has one of the best lines, one of the best descriptions of a pro wrestling match that I've ever heard in my life. He says, direct quote, "This match is like someone walking through a house full of explosives, smoking a cigarette."
Tremendous.
Just the perfect description of this.
He then tells us that Dr. Death is going to challenge Lex Luger for the United States title at Wrestle War, which this card continues to get better. So
sign me up. 90 Lex Luger against Dr. Death, who could throw everyone around? Hell yeah.
For the U.S. title, and then, of course, Sting and Ric Flair for the heavyweight title. This show is stacked. So we've got Animal in with Fatu. Each man power slams each other. Hawk gets in, and he has a quick flurry, but a super kick from Samu cuts Hawk off. They start triple teaming him in the corner.
It's very much of the triple teams. It's mostly double teams. The majority of this match, as it should be, is Samu and Fatu, the actual Samoan SWAT team. I feel like we don't get a lot of Samoan Savage here, and that's fine. It's for the best. Also, this is noteworthy in that the early seasons of this podcast were kind of stealthily a Fatu / making a difference Fatu / Rikishi podcast. It's been a long time, but here Fatu, I think, in his peak form as a terrifying member of the Samoan SWAT team, this is far different than, think of these two men as baby faces on Monday Night Raw in, was it 93 or 94, that episode we did a while back, managed by Captain Lou Albano. This is far more fitting for them here as scary heels.
Yeah, in the back episodes, they won the tag team titles against the Quebecers on an episode of Raw. You can hear us review.
Episode of Raw.
But here we get the triple teaming, more double teaming in the corner, and then
those
Samu.
Double punches. I have to mention those double punches.
Yeah.
Samu and Fatu are they're in the corner throwing punches. It's not like one's throwing, the other's throwing at the same time over and over and over again. It's almost like the forerunner in a tag team way of Austin stomping a mud hole into somebody, because they do it. It just slowly beats them down into the mat to where you almost expect them to go through the bottom of the mat and just disappear. Just great intensity from the SST.
Samu hits the big splash off the top, which is their finish.
Yes.
And Animal has to come in to break up the pin. It quickly breaks down with all 6 men pairing off. Fatu accidentally super kicks Samu. Hawk comes off the top, hits the clothesline from behind, and gets the 3 count on Fatu.
A wild top rope clothesline that I think Hawk didn't realize he was going to have to jump as far across the ring as he did to make contact with Samu, because he really has to reach out, and it almost seemed like he hurt himself a little bit. But I liked that almost nothing about this match looked clean or crisp.
No.
It was 6 big, mean, scary guys throwing each other around. And it's like this match and what you just described, it was the prime difference between the NWA / WCW and the WWF even back then. When I watched WWF as a kid, like everything looked so clean, and it almost looked too clean. I'm talking on the execution of the moves. I'm not even talking on angles or backstage stuff. Whereas watching the NWA, stuff looked like a struggle. Sometimes stuff didn't go perfectly planned, but that made it feel more, it made it easier to buy into. I feel like this entire match and that finish was emblematic of that.
No, and it was the exact level of chaos that you wanted.
Perfect
and
word.
That led to the confusion, and even it looked like Fatu might have kicked out right at 3.
Yeah, the
and
3.00001 kick out from Fatu.
Yeah, so this was everything you wanted, because the chaos would continue as the Skyscrapers immediately hit the ring and attack the Road Warriors after the match. This was a tremendous main event for main event.
Yes.
Jim Ross then tells us that we then it's like a weird edited inserted thing afterwards.
It's clearly inserted. It's not the same green screened in background they had earlier on of the crowd. It's a similar shot but different. And Jim Ross he's not wearing a suit jacket. He's both understated and yet quietly almost frantic at the same time, which fits what's going on here, what you're about to lay out, the news that's breaking at the end of the show that will have major ramifications on Wrestle War 90.
Jim Ross tells us that after the Clash of the Champions, the Horsemen have attacked Sting. And Sting is out. He's getting a knee operation. They have no idea how long Sting will be out, but he will not be able to wrestle Ric Flair in the main event for the World's Championship. What really happened was in that clash, Sting was climbing the cage and tore up his knee while climbing the cage, and he is legit out after needing that knee operation and wasn't going to be able to do that. This threw that amazing card into shambles as the Dr. Death Lex Luger match is off. Luger gets moved to the main event spot where he would take on Ric Flair and lose for the heavyweight title. That Skyscrapers Road Warriors match, Mean Marcellus was out, and so they replaced him with a masked Skyscraper. It was Mike Enos under a mask.
Beverly brother.
Yeah, under a mask as the fill-in there. So like this whole card started to fall apart. So what sounded so awesome never materialized, and we missed out on 3 of the matches we were excited about there.
And not only did we miss out on that, but Sting's eventual title reign when he came back from injury, while the victory, which we've reviewed on this podcast before, was a great moment. Once he won the title at the Great American Bash, like the reign did not take off. Sting didn't draw. It kind of felt like the moment had passed, and they had to relatively quickly move the title back to Ric Flair. So it's also a big what if, and because having to move, because that was also, wasn't that then the Luger Flair blood stoppage finish at Wrestle War 90 where Flair had Luger had Flair beat, but he was bleeding and the referee called it?
I don't remember the finish. I don't remember how that ended, but yeah, for sure it was. It ended with babyface Lex Luger not winning the title here, which is also a choice.
And foreshadowing for what would happen with Lex Luger challenging for a world title as a babyface and not winning the title a couple of years later.
Yeah, this main event show did a tremendous job catching us up on where we were with all of the feuds, getting us ready for Wrestle War, getting this going, and then having to pivot at the end. This was a great job by Main Event in getting done what it needed to get done and not being the Saturday show, right? This is the Sunday show, and this was great. It exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, same here. I was excited to watch it just based on the curiosity factor of going back and watching a show in an era that I hadn't watched in a long time, generally with this, early 1990 NWA. But yeah, for not being the A show, they did a great job, particularly given they had to do a few things. There was recapping what had just happened at the Clash and then finding a way to get everyone updated on the major news that had broke about Sting being injured, and everything else along the way was fun. I mean, I think as far as a favorite thing for me, there's a lot of good stuff on this, but the main event, I just love the wild, chaotic nature of it. It felt like one of those wild brawls that you would see in Japan, whether it be in All Japan or New Japan in the 80s or early 90s, where it's in Japan, but it's 6 guys from the US or 4 guys from the US just having a big, crazy brawl. This had that chaos and danger that you didn't necessarily often see in the US. And the way the show was, I guess, originally planned to go off the air with the Skyscrapers coming out and everybody brawling was a great way to send people home leading into what would have been the card for Wrestle War 90.
Yeah, tremendous. I agree 100%. That was the best thing on this show. Worst thing on this show for you?
To me, clearly the worst thing on the show was it cutting off the northern exposure, the counter northern exposure that we would have had from Norman. But to me, the only real answer is the Mod Squad and how long they got the heat on Ricky Morton. It was too much. It was way
you are
too
correct. Honorable mention to not using Black Sabbath Iron Man for the Road Warriors entrance as a worse thing. But that was the Mod Squad just no thanks.
No, they weren't entertaining in 1987 on that promo that we had from World Championship Wrestling, and they had not picked anything up in the intervening 3 years.
No, but overall, a great show, a fun watch, exactly why we do this podcast. And we do this podcast every single week, the randomizer, picking a show for us to watch. Sometimes it picks things that aren't a full show. Sometimes it picks things that are just a match or two, and things that are weird and don't really fit into this feed. That's where we have our Patreon, patreon.com/wrestling at random. There we do bonus shows every single Thursday. We do an additional episode of this podcast there only exclusively for bonus feed members. You can sign up there at patreon.com/wrestling at random, or if Apple Podcasts is your podcatcher of choice, there's a subscribe button right there. As soon as you click it, you unlock over 100 additional episodes of this podcast that you've never heard of. They're all waiting for you in the bonus feed as well. So that's another way you can support the show. If you can't support the show financially in these times, we understand. The other way to support the show is to tell your wrestling fan friends about the show. Make sure you're following us on social media at Wrestle at Random for both Instagram and Twitter. Facebook.com/wrestling at random as well. And with that, we are going to call it a podcast. So, Adam, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Randomizer, for checking off maybe the final box of NWA/WCW as far as unique television shows. I don't know, maybe they can get us an episode of WCW Pro Chicago, a hyper-local WCW show at some point. But no, this was very fun.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we will talk to you again next time.